This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Some have been trying to reach quick conclusions about China using one or two adjectives to describe a country with a few thousand years history and fastest evolving society. I'm afraid that is a bit short of accuracy. That's also what Hiria Ottino, the president of the Council on Pacific Affairs, also advisor to the president of French Polynesia, thinks. After studying traditional Chinese medicine for years and trying to speak the language here in China as accurate as he can, he said there are entry points to understand China. For example, get things done in the most efficient way. How the Chinese is doing it, what does it say about what they believe and how they're dealing with the others? Take a listen. I know that you've been doing a lot of research about Chinese traditional medicine. Tell me more about how you got to know China through this very special window opportunity.
Yes, so I lived in Africa, in Madagascar, and when I was a young boy, I wanted to be useful to others with very little logistics. You know, we were living up in the countryside with no roads, etc. So I got very much interested in Chinese medicine because you could help others with almost nothing. You know, your bare hands, a few needles, and knowing 中药. So I felt that I needed to do that. So my passion for China went through the Chinese medicine. So then I went to China in 1987. I was 17. I did Chinese language first, then a bit of Chinese civilization for 2 years. Then I did 本科.
Congratulations on what you have achieved. Not many would manage to get through, you know, all the tests of our traditional Chinese medicine. It's not easy. I didn't.
Yes, but you know, being a foreigner, I'm sure that I lost many things in translations, as we said. So, but I have this love for Chinese medicine, and I keep it with me, even though I don't practice anymore. You know, but it has been a very, very solid basis for me as interaction and to understand people and to understand the world better, I hope.
So you have a merciful teacher, right? To say the least.
They was, I would say, one of the best humans I've met were my teachers in Chinese medicine back at school in Yunnan Zhongyi. They were just extraordinary people. You know, we were back in the late 80s, you know, so China was very different from now. And I was the only foreigner, you know, in the school. So people were extremely protective about me, you know, so there was a whole group, you know, so I really felt the warm-hearted niceness, you know, expressing all over me.
Talking about China, you learned traditional Chinese medicine. Earlier you told me when we were doing this pre-communication before the interview, you said effectiveness. That's how you would use the standard to test the impact of traditional Chinese medicine. Tell me more about that, and tell me more about how, from that angle, you are seeing China, how China is run, the governance styles of China, the priorities of China, and how the Chinese people think.
Yes, you know, I remember a joke of one of my Chinese medical teachers, and I was a translator for him, and we had a group of Western doctors, and we were visiting a Zhongyi hospital in Yunnan. And in this group of Western doctors, you had those people, you know, with a bit of a smile on the side of the face, you know, like not believing in it. But you had people who were curious, though, you know, and they wanted to learn a bit more. And you had the people who were totally closed up, you know. So you have those two categories of people. And one of my teachers said as a joke, the problem with Westerners is that they ask, it works in practice, but in theory, does it work? You know, and I found that thought very intelligent. And so it is true that Chinese theory is a bit difficult to understand, you know, Tianhe, etc., the five elements, and how the outside world, you know, has such an impact on us, you know, and what is the meridians, what are the acupuncture points. But the fact is, at the end of the day, it works. So for me, the effectiveness is something which is probably the most important, and we should put away, you know, all the other ideas and ideals that people might have. So this is what I think is so strong about China, is that, you know, effectiveness, you know. So, and of course, you know, when you are going to cross the river, you know, you're going to get your shoes wet. So you have to be careful of where you step. But the goal is to be able to go on the other side. So I think this is something that we really need to learn. But it seems that before we were saying that communist countries, I would say, you know, they were locked up, you know, in a sort of frame of mind, you know, that they could not escape and see reality. I find that today the opposite is true. It seems that China was able to see how the world is functioning. And what is, I think, the most important is that China is able to adapt to the current circumstances, you know, of the day. And this is, I think, the great power of China is that adaptability, because people, I think, were chosen also for that adaptability. As now in Western countries, you know, we are so locked up in our ideals that when those ideas do not work, you know, we try, you know, to find ways to explain why, but it's so difficult to advance. But talking about that, I think that the future of the world, you know, in Western countries, you have the woke, which is going on, also racial issues and this extensive equality, you know. For example, in official documents, they want to take away the word mother, you know, the word father, you know, just to put parents, you know. So we're going to such an extreme that I believe that there's going to be bridges that are going to be able to be built, you know, besides, you know, ideology of how the system works. So I'm very curious to see on how that is going to work out.
How do you see the Chinese Communist Party has managed to find its effective approach toward the evolving situations of China and how China interact with the rest of the world?
Back in the late 80s, when the Berlin Wall fell, I remember that very clearly. There was a movement saying that it was the end of history, you know, the end of history as we actually thought, that the world tomorrow is going to be a capitalist, you know, neoliberal system, and that this is going to gain all over the world and we're all going to live like that forever. So that was a very sad prospect. And then China came along, and it caught everybody off guard. And the problem is, I think today we are still in this a bit off guard situation, at least of the Western powers. And when you look at the defense, you know, white papers of the Pacific countries, it's very aggressive. So I think it's very important for all of us, you know, to be able to sit down and talk. And I know that China is doing that, you know. When you look at the white papers of China, when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, the idea behind all of that is try to find a balance, you know, between all of us, and to be able to share the future together. So peace only works when the different sides want a peace. Right. The difficulty is going to be when one side doesn't want it. Then what do you do? So I think this 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, of course, it's a very important time for the Chinese people. I mean, there is so much to be proud of, but I think it's a very important maybe moment and occasion to share your success with the outside world.
Dr. Ottino, you are painting a very challenging but realistic picture in front of us about what exactly the realities are today. And therefore, do you think it's too much wishful thinking to have so-called a peaceful international environment for China from now on?
Do people want that peaceful environment with China? I mean, this I think is the most important question, because I mean, up to now, China has been extremely peaceful. So you have never been on a outside leading action. So I think this is very important to showcase. But more importantly, you have succeeded because you were focused on yourselves, I would say, no, to be able to lift China up. And I remember a saying of Deng Xiaoping, I think he said, you know, socialism, you don't have to be poor and weak, you know, and I think China has absolutely shown that. And today, China should be an example for the other countries. But can the other countries understand what is going on in China? This is I think, the most difficult part. And I really hope, as a foreigner, that for your 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, you may explain, you know, how you have succeeded. For me, one of the most important success is, it's very difficult to measure, is unity that was in China. You know, and of course there were sacrifices. You know, people suffered, you know, to be able to achieve what they are today. But it has been done in a wonderful spirit, you know, and this emotion. It's very difficult to talk about it when you do not live in China. You know, when you haven't seen that happen at every corner of the country.
One of the things that China has been proud of over the past decades about its people-centered. Now, how much the policies really apply to it at different stages of development, there might be various of degrees, but how do you see that as working as an accountability and credibility system for the Chinese Communist Party when it is facing the public it is supposed to serve, which is the Chinese people?
I would like to step back a bit. In Western democracies, you know, we live in a world of lobbyists, and when you ask Americans, for example, over 80% of the people believe that lobbyists have too much power inside the systems. In fact, in a society, what is the most important is that the people are happy. So I think when you talk about people-centered, the whole goal is how can you make your population happy? So you, as a public servant, you know, you mustn't work, you know, half-heartedly, you know, and try to find your little self-interest in the whole idea. You know, you have to focus entirely into your work. And I think when I hear people-centered, I hear this. You know, it's when you work for the people, it's not a work, you know, it should be a commitment. And the other point is that when you're people-centered, in my view, you're putting the lobbyist away. So the big interests, you know, are taken out of the picture. And I think this is a huge challenge for the West to be able to achieve that, especially today.
This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Now, it is common sense that one size doesn't fit all. However, what about political systems and how countries' philosophy and society are working with it? That's what Daniel Bell, the Dean of the School of Political Science and Public Administration at Shandong University, has been researching about for years. Professor Bell is the author of the book includes The China Model, China's New Confucianism, and East Meets West, Human Rights and Democracy in East Asia. He now is researching about what Chineseness is. Let's take a look at my earlier interview with him. Now I'm joined by Daniel Bell. Let me ask you about your take on the latest crisis regarding COVID-19, the global pandemic. What do you make of the cultural elements of how we are dealing with it?
I think one of the features of China and Chinese culture is that there's a respect for hierarchy that is grounded in superior ability and virtue. So sometimes it means respect for conscientious professionals. We can call them modern day junzi or exemplary persons. For example, Dr. Zhong Nanshan, who was famous for helping to deal with the SARS crisis in 2003. And once he sounded the alarm on this new SARS-like virus on January 20th, it's not just the government, but the people respected him and basically agreed with measures, very strong measures taken 3 days later to deal with the crisis. And there's also respect for, we can say, a very capable government led by officials selected in a meritocratic process who will take measures in the interest of the well-being of the people. Generally speaking, cultures with a Confucian heritage, where there's a tradition of social responsibility, concern with social harmony, as well as combined with a kind of legalist heritage, Fajian in Chinese, which is basically a strong state that values efficiency. When those two are combined, it can effectively deal with emergencies, especially important and hard to do in a large, diverse country such as China.
Professor Bell, I know you're also now writing a book about Chineseness. It is not necessarily a racial issue, but rather a cultural issue. Tell me more about what do you see as Chineseness or un-Chineseness? If you have one, you must have the other, right, Professor?
Well, that's a huge and great question.
I know, it's a big one.
I'm only at the beginning stages of writing a book that was probably going to be at least a 5-year plan, maybe even a 10-year plan. But the basic idea is throughout much of Chinese history until about the mid to late 19th century, the idea of what it meant to be Chinese was a kind of cultural idea. It depends on the language, it depends on the rituals. But in the mid to late 19th century, this is one of the worst influence of the West. There was a belief that the world can be ranked according to races, and with the white race on top. And some Chinese leading intellectuals and reformers thought they thought that the way to become powerful is to affirm our identity based on race, but changing the classification with our race on top. So this idea, I think, is unfortunately a terrible influence of Western racism. And I think there's a good reason to go back to the traditional idea of what it means to be Chinese, but of course updated for the modern world.
How do you see, the kinds of ideologies that politicians or political scientists, including you possibly, always have in their speech vis-a-vis the cultural identity and philosophy that has been with us for much more than a nation state, much longer than a nation state, particularly modern nation state. How do you see these very different and yet possibly similar concepts?
The big problem is when two representatives of cultures engage with each other and one thinks that they hold superior views or clear, more direct access to the truth, and engage with the other as a kind of somewhat inferior person who should be, through various means, whether it's force or persuasion, learn to become like me. I mean, much of the interaction of the West has been like with China has been like that. I mean, Jonathan Spence, the historian at Yale, wrote a great book called To Change China, where he went through the history of Western missionaries and intellectuals and businessmen who came to China eventually with the idea that China should be changed to become basically like me. And they all failed because China has its own civilization and cultural habits, among other reasons. But obviously now it's the way to engage with another culture is to, hold on to one's beliefs and try to defend them, but also be willing to learn from the other culture and change one's original standpoint in response to that engagement. It seems to me that's the only way forward now.
A lot of food for thoughts, isn't it, about China and how to look at China. And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more Search World Insight, check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.